20th Supreme Court decision on voting rights, 23 states have enacted voter suppression laws that deny millions of Americans their voice, their vote. Now, 55 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, we must protect the bedrock power of the ability of people to have the right to vote. So that will be on the floor this week. H.R. 3, H.R. 4. There are other legislation on the floor. I hope that you observe it, one of it to address the insider trading that is coming up this week as well. And then just to say, we have 275 bills. And as I said to you, legislate, investigate, litigate. In our legislation, we have 275 bills that are bipartisan on Mitch McConnell's desk. The Grim Reaper says all we're doing is impeachment. No, we have 275 bipartisan bills on your desk. Among them are background checks this week. As soon as we got back, we had a vigil. I have these are bullets. One from a survivor. Last night we had a vigil, all this number of years since Newtown, and every year we have this vigil. But every day we pray that Mitch McConnell will pass that legislation because it will save lives. 25,000 people have died since we sent the bill over. Not all of them would have been saved, but many of them would have. We have paycheck fairness for women. We have equal pay for equal work, paycheck fairness, Violence Against Women Act, reauthorization, issues that relate to raising the minimum wage. 30+ million people will get an increase in their pay if we raise the minimum wage, 23 million of them women. Equality Act and discrimination against the LGBTQ community, Dream and Promise Act, keeping our promise to our precious dreamers. SAFE Act, saving our federal election system that they don't seem to be interested in doing. The list goes on and on. And the Climate Action Now, H.R. 9, that was legislation that we talked about last weekend when I took a delegation. There were 14 of us to Spain for the COP25. We were very well received there. Our message was, we're still in, even though the president has opted out of Paris, the Paris Accord. We are there saying, in the House of Representatives, in state houses, in governor's mansions, in city halls across the country, in the private sector, and in the public sector, Americans are still in. Our children know better than some of the leaders in Washington, D.C., the urgency of the climate crisis. It's a public health issue, clean air, clean water, food safety. It's a jobs issue. It's an economic issue. Jobs, good paying green jobs. Keep America #1, preeminent in the green technologies. It's a defense issue because the world is in peril from the climate crisis. If you there, you would have heard very dire comments, a recent UN report explaining how close to a real problem we are. I mean, the clock is ticking. As you know, we have a great deal of exuberance in our caucus on this subject, and we want to work together under the leadership of Kathy Castor, our chair of the Select Committee on Climate, as well as the other committees of jurisdiction. The last point I'll make is that if you do believe, as I, that this is God's creation, we have a moral responsibility to be good stewards of it. If you don't believe that it's God's creation, you must agree that we have a moral responsibility to pass it on to the planet on to future generations. So that's legislate. Investigate, as I mentioned this morning, we've heard from patriotic public servants, some of them appointed by President Trump, present the facts. And they are just undeniable, the facts of the president's actions. I won't go into it unless you ask. You heard yesterday in the Judiciary Committee, the scholars present the Constitution and how the facts and the Constitution give us no choice but to move forward with impeachment of the president. And so I'm arranged for the chairs. We have 6 chairs, the relevant committees, to make recommendations about articles of impeachment. Legislate, investigate, litigate. We're winning every court case, whether it's Deutsche Bank for the president's records, Mazer case for the president's records. The list goes on, but they keep bumping it up to a higher court. Now some of it is approaching the Supreme Court level. And so we're waiting to see if the court will even take up something that is so in defiance of their precedent that says, yes, Congress has the right to subpoena and oversight over the executive branch. In that regard, I just want to say this to you, my friends in the press. When you keep asking, why don't we wait for these court cases? The president's actions in sending all these, taking these things to court and then bumping them up in court is an obstruction of justice. And so we're not going to be accomplices to his obstruction of justice. We have our constitutional responsibility, we have our facts, and we will act upon them. And as the courts act, because we're operating in the Congress and in the courts, and as the courts come forward with their decisions, whenever that may be, the president will have to be held accountable for that at that time. Any questions?
He's been hesitant for weeks to make this move, and cautious to make this move to impeach. Was there an aha moment for you personally, a piece of evidence or testimony that swayed you now to take this step?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because all I hear from the press is that I'm moving so swiftly that it's like a blur going by. This has been a couple of years, 2.5, since the initial investigation of the Russian involvement in America's election, which started much of this and then led to other things. But I do think the aha moment for the country was the action taken by the President Trump appointee, the Inspector General of the intelligence community, who said that there was a credible report from a whistleblower of grave concern, and that Congress should be aware of that. And that is the facts of the Ukraine situation just changed everything. The polls went from 59 opposed to impeachment, 34 in favor, to about even. And let me just say this isn't, we are saying Ukraine. The Ukraine was the vehicle of the president's action, asking a president of another country to make an announcement that he was investigating the president's political opponent and withholding military assistance that was voted by the Congress of the United States, unless and until he did so, the president did so. But this isn't about Ukraine, this is about Russia, who benefited by our withholding of that military assistance. Russia. It's about Russia. Russia invading eastern Ukraine. Over 10,000 people died, now maybe 13,000, some of them in the absence of our conveying that military assistance that was voted in a bipartisan way by the Congress of the United States. So sometimes people say, well, I don't know about Ukraine, I don't know that much about Ukraine. Well, our adversary in this is Russia. All roads lead to Putin. Understand that. And so that was the aha moment where we had, see, in the other cases, we had the obstruction of justice, but we didn't have as much information as to what he was obstructing justice on, because the White House was withholding the information and not enabling us, that even Richard Nixon enabled us to have the grand jury testimony. That was
You mentioned those previous investigations. Do you want to see elements of the Mueller report or these other?
I'm not going to talk about that, okay? I'm not going to talk. My chairman will be making recommendations as to what our counsel, our lawyers, our chair, the staffs of the committees have been sensational, and we'll look to them for their judgment about what the articles of impeachment was. With all due respect to your question, I'm not here to talk about that, because that That's what they'll be working on. And let me just say in that regard, what was really remarkable in the course of these weeks is people have heard us talk about this. They hear about the IG, this and that. A few weeks ago, for 2 weeks, under leadership of Adam Schiff, of whom we're extremely proud, but working with Adam Schiff and Elliot Engel and our beloved Elijah Cummings, whom we miss terribly, but continues to be an inspiration to us, but now Carolyn Maloney. The 3 committees of jurisdiction, intelligence, foreign affairs, and government reform, had hearings, bringing in, again, patriotic Americans, some appointed by the president, who presented the facts. And then we had, yesterday, the hearing of the professors, the constitutional scholars. What was so valuable about that is, while we have talked about it, and while the foreign service officers talked about it, when the professors taught about it, they taught about it. And they taught about the Constitution and what the vision was of our founders and what the violations are of this president and what that is all about. So I think people had just a disparate grasp of why it is important for us to go forward.
There are Democrats from districts of the president carried who were skeptical about moving forward, and the impeachment inquiry they later embraced moving forward. Are you concerned at all that some of them may face a backlash if they vote for articles of impeachment and it could ultimately hurt them in their races come next year?
Well, thank you for your question. This has absolutely nothing to do with politics. It isn't about politics, partisanship, Democrats and Republicans. That's totally insignificant. It's about the Constitution of the United States, the oath of office we take to protect and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. It's about the president not honoring his oath. So no, I'm not concerned.
Madam Speaker, you have
Okay.
Speaker, on a slightly different note, are you concerned about what this vote might do to the country, and how did you weigh that as you came to this decision?
How this vote would do? Well, as I said this morning, I'm really sorry the president made this necessary by his complete disregard for the vision of our founders, for what he is doing. Article 2 says I can do whatever I want. It was completely contrary to what our founders had in mind. So all along I said for 2 years, this is an impeachment is not a pleasant experience. It can be divisive. We don't take any glee in this at all. It's heartbreaking. But the president gave us no choice. So we're not going to say, well, we would honor our oath of office, but what? He's the one who's dividing the country on this. We are honoring the Constitution of the United States. And let me say this about our founders. On the Great Seal of the United States, it says, Novo Ordo Seclorum, a new order for the ages. They had so much confidence in what they were doing that they said it was going to last forever, for the ages, because they had written a constitution, the founding documents, thank God, they made it amendable so that we could expand freedom over time and always will continue to. But they predicated that on people honoring the Constitution of the United States. They could predict that there would be a rogue president of the United States. They probably couldn't predict that there would be a rogue Senate leader who would just ignore the facts and the Constitution on all of this. And so we have the responsibility to do that, to strengthen the institution in which we live. And if we did not act on this, the message to any future president, Democratic, Republican, whoever she or he may be, would be, you can do whatever you want. And if we did not act on this, we should amend the Constitution and remove impeachment, which was very important to our founders. Novus Ordo Seclorum, from anyone. And I also, from anyone is my theme. That was New Order for the Age. From anyone is what I've always said about this. As we go forward, we did this in a very deliberative, fair, strong way, recognizing our founders gave us many calls to action. The times have found us, found them to establish a new country, fight for it and the rest, found us to protect and defend what they did. by honoring our oath of office. But I also said, e pluribus unum, from many one. So we take that heed of that too, to be uniting in what we are doing, to be healing in what we are doing, instead of having an increased violation of what our founders intended and undermining our democracy. We see our mission as defending democracy for the people.
Can you address one of the questions?
Come on,
Not questions.
In your remarks this morning, you said that we will proceed in a manner worthy of our oath of office.
That's right.
Many have indicated this is one of the most important, serious things that the House of Representatives could undertake.
Absolutely.
So,
It's historic.
right, and you have not put a timetable on doing this. It's been announced there's going to be another hearing on Monday.
Presentation of what we have in the committees will be presented on Monday.
Right. So, is there any sort of concern about, you said it's not a blur, but moving this before Christmas, moving this before the new year, anything on that, maybe taking more time so that the public understands? There was one member this morning, Debbie Dingle, who said that she was meeting with a woman at a funeral and said, I don't understand all of this. Is it important maybe to slow this down, take more time, proceed in a manner worthy of your...
We are proceeding in a manner worthy of the Constitution. We feel comfortable with all of the time that has gone into this 2.5 years since the appointment of Mueller and all that transpired since then. I have confidence, humility, again, a heart full of love for America. We are doing this in the right way, and I'm very proud of our chairman who've taken that. If some people have some unease, we'll catch them up, and we haven't asked anybody for a vote, nor will we. People will make their own minds up about what this is about. I'd love to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you hate the president?
Good morning, I'm Chris Jansen here on a very busy day at MSNBC headquarters in New York.
As a house, we don't hate anybody, not anybody in the world. So don't accuse me.
I did not accuse you.
You did.
I asked a question.
You did. And
Representative Collins yesterday suggested that the Democrats are doing this simply because they don't like the
it
guy.
has nothing to do with it. Let me just say this.
I think it's an important
I
point.
think the president is a coward when it comes to helping our kids who are afraid of gun violence. I think he is cruel when he doesn't deal with helping our dreamers, of which we're very proud. I think he's in denial about the climate crisis. However, that's about the election. This is about the election. Take it up in the election. This is about the Constitution of the United States and the facts that lead to the president's violation of his oath of office. And as a Catholic, I resent your using the word hate in a sentence that addresses me. I don't hate anyone. I was raised in a way that is a heart full of love, and always prayed for the president. And I still pray for the president. I pray for the president all the time. So don't mess with me when it comes to words like that.
She is not in a good mood. She's heartbroken by all this. This has been devastating for people that have taken the oath of office seriously, knowing that what was being performed right in front of their very eyes. I can tell by looking at her, she looks like, I don't want to use the word hell, but I can tell that she's been bewildered by all this. And it's not only bewildering to her, but it's bewildering to anybody who cares about America. If you don't care about America, then it's not going to affect you the way that it has affected other people. She actually looks good considering what that she's been through. Because believe it or not, this has raised my blood pressure. I couldn't tell you how many times towards sitting and listening to these hearings again and again and again and again. And whenever you have compelling evidence, but yet no, you have the Republicans saying that we don't have no evidence, shows you the stagnation of this country that has reached a crucial, critical, imperative era in all of our lives. And whoever don't care about America, then go ahead, snigger, laugh, make fun of the very country that you live in. But to be quite frank with you, you probably don't deserve to live in a country like this. Because in order to live in a open, fair, free democracy, sometimes you gotta put yourself out there on the limb. Especially if you know what's going on is in fact wrong. No ifs, ands, buts about it. It's just plain Jane wrong. And that's exactly why this has become so emotional, so distressing, so mind-boggling, so gut-wrenching, to the point that people, you can see the wear and tear on their faces and the expressions of their attitude. It's the same thing as Mr. Lincoln. If a person knows anything at all about emotions and about the psychic of somebody, you can look at the pictures of Abraham Lincoln whenever he went into office versus whenever he left office. Well, he didn't actually leave office. He was assassinated out of office. But you can look at that man and tell that the things that he was dealing with during the time that he was dealing with them was wearing on his demeanor. It was wearing on his emotions. It was wearing on his livelihood as far as his health. And don't tell me that health don't have a big influence in the name of emotions. Because a person's body cannot absorb but just so much bad luck. You know, you get thrown all these curveballs, and maybe one or two curveballs, some people can handle it all right. Some people can handle 4 or 5 curveballs. But whenever you're steadily being bombarded, I mean bombarded, the way that this ministry was bombarded from the time I walked back into Weakley County in 2014, just basically being hunted, being attacked. You can't take but so much until your body starts showing irregularities in what's happening pertaining to the stress and the emotions that you're going through. And that's exactly what they wanted to do to the founder of the Windmill Ministries. And this includes Tommy Moore, Tommy Thomas, Mike Wilson, any other law enforcement agency around here. That's exactly what they wanted to do to the founder of the Windmill Ministries. So I tend to wonder, and I've questioned this in some of my other interviews, how come Donald Trump was so gung-ho, I'm going to use the word gung-ho, towards making sure that everybody that he put in the Supreme Court was people that basically owed him a favor. I'm going to tell you why. Because he probably foreseen this moment coming. And he's hoping that he's paid off enough people that once it winds up, if it winds up in the face or in the laps of the Supreme Court justice system, he's hoping that he'll have enough sway to sway in his direction. Once more, I don't think it's ever going to make it to the Supreme Court. Not after yesterday, not after what I heard. Because I sat in depth and listened to each and every testimony and each and every person that was speaking, and there was nothing more than a pure, mere, complete, total pattern. It was it was disgraceful. It was heartbreaking. It was shameful. And watching what that was being exacerbated right in front of our very eyes. What was being demonstrated openly and publicly in a public hearing like that. Half of the time I sat there with my jaw halfway open, not knowing what to think or not knowing what to believe until yesterday. And since yesterday, I pretty well made up my mind that this guy, I don't know what kind of tricks that he was trying to pull out of the bag, but it's backfired on him because he's got caught red-handed. That's what the New York Times should read tomorrow in their headline. That's what the LA Times, that's what the Atlanta paper and all the other papers around here should read tomorrow morning. Caught red-handed. No ifs, no ands, no buts, unless he can come up with some sort of a wonderful, wonderful reason of the reason why he done what he done during that 45, 43-day period. Unless he can come up with a reasonable explanation to the country, it looks like you're fired. In other words, he's going to eat his own words pertaining to what he was up to. Him, Rudy Giuliani, and all those other people that was manipulating the will of the people pertaining to what Congress had already passed. Sad, extremely sad.
Nancy Pelosi going back to the podium to take exception to something that was said about hate by a member of the press. Good morning, I'm Chris Jansen. Very busy day at MSNBC headquarters in New York. I'm sorry the president made this necessary. The words of Nancy Pelosi just moments ago, following an historic announcement earlier this morning on drafting articles of impeachment. You saw her, she just wrapped up answering key questions about what we will see next from the Democrats and the moment she thinks this country is in.
Yes, Congress has the right to subpoena and oversight over the executive branch. In that regard, I just want to say this to you, my friends in the press. When you keep asking, why don't we wait for these court cases? The president's actions in sending all these, taking these things to court and then bumping them up in court is an obstruction of justice. And so we're not going to be accomplices to his obstruction of justice. We have our constitutional responsibility, we have our facts, and we will act upon them.
We're going to go shortly to MSNBC Garrett Haake on Capitol Hill. He was in the room where Pelosi just wrapped up. Also with me, NBC News White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, Jake Sherman, senior writer for Politico and an MSNBC political analyst, and David Jolly, a former Republican congressman from Florida who has left the party and is now an MSNBC contributor. So, Jake, I think it's worth just taking a breath, stepping back for a second, because things have been moving so quickly this morning. To just say this is an extraordinary moment. This is, as Nancy Pelosi says, an historic moment, what we're seeing unfold over the last couple of hours, a very serious moment. Give us your headline from what we've learned from Nancy Pelosi today.
Not a surprise, but historic. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is the first time Democrats have said they are drafting impeachment articles to attempt to remove the president from office. This was basically, there was no chance this wasn't going to happen once the process started, but now it's in full gear in a month in which the government runs out of money and the president's trying to get a major trade deal across the finish line, and we're less than 1 year from Election Day. So all of those dynamics together make for December, make for the moment right now one of the biggest political moments we've seen in the last decade or so, if not more. Impeachments are rare. They're rare for a reason, because you're trying to remove a duly elected president of the United States. Now, the big question for me, and I'm sure for Garrett, who's also reporting on this, is when will this happen? Will Democrats be able to get this across the finish line this month? And if they do, why are they doing that? There's a lot of questions about that, whether it's proper, whether it's advisable, and what the politics are. And we don't know the answer to that. My guess at this point is they are going to do this month. But again, like I said a second ago, this runs into a government funding debate. The government runs out of money in 15 days. And this is a very hurried legislative time. As your viewers know, Decembers are always very rushed. This December even more so. So again, we don't expect the Senate to remove the president, but of course the Senate will have to try the president. The president will be on trial with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court presiding just a couple feet away from me in the Senate chamber, likely in January. So again, high stakes, high drama, historic moment for the House of Representatives and for the United States.
And Garrett, we said that you were in the room where Nancy Pelosi just spoke, and to his point, there were a lot of questions about the timing here. In fact, you asked a question that really was about, I guess, lean toward that. Anyway, give us your sense of where this goes next.
Well, sure. On the timing, we now know that there's going to be a hearing in the Judiciary Committee on Monday morning presenting that Intel Committee report. That's moving pretty quickly. If they have the hearing on Monday, there could be more action in that committee later in the week. It does suggest that Democrats want to move quickly. My question was about whether or not there'd be elements of the Mueller report that would appear in any articles that get drafted here. And while the Speaker didn't answer my question directly, she said that's a question for the chair people. I thought it was interesting that several times during the course of the news conference, she did reference the start of that investigation as the start of this broader process. You know, she said it was the Ukraine call and the Inspector General's report that crystallized in her mind the need to move forward on impeachment, but she repeatedly went back to the idea that it was
maybe I read too much into that, Garrett, but I thought the way she phrased it was interesting. She didn't say that the seminal moment was the whistleblower. She said it was the Inspector General saying that what the whistleblower complaint said was worth looking into.
Yeah, Chris, and that's important too because it was that Inspector General report that used the term urgent concern. That's part of how Democrats are defending moving so quickly here. They say, look, it was the intelligence community Inspector General who said this is urgent. That's why we're moving fast. But under several different lines of questioning, Pelosi went back to the idea that it was this 2.5-year investigation that's the timeline here, not the IG report or the whistleblower as the start of this. That says to me that there's at least some element of the Mueller report that's something they're considering as they're moving forward here. And I think that's important to watch, whether this goes beyond an abuse of power article, an obstruction article, and whether they pull something in from the Mueller report. A lot of Democrats feel like there's unanswered questions or unfinished business with Mueller. They were frustrated the way that investigation fizzled out, and whether any of those elements end up in what finally comes to the floor or comes to the Judiciary Committee, I just think it's something that's worth paying attention to.
Yeah, David Jolly, I mean, that is one of the key questions, right? Exactly what will these articles of impeachment say? Do they keep them tightly focused? Do they get more broad? I'm sure that you, as somebody who has sat in that chamber, had a moment as well, understanding the historic nature of what is unfolding. But from a practical matter, what do you think is going to happen next?
So I was on the Hill as a staffer during the Clinton impeachment, as well as obviously in Congress just before Donald Trump stepping in. There are a lot of similarities, but it's being handled differently by the minority party. Democrats in '98 recognized the underlying truth and argued within the construct of the Constitution for a lesser penalty than impeachment. I think what you will see Republicans do, in contrast to that, is actually overlook the truth in this moment and refuse to legitimize the process. That moment there at the end, Chris, with Nancy Pelosi returning and answering that question, and good for Speaker Pelosi for being aggressive in how she handled that, is a perfect reflection of the challenges Democrats face as well as the Republican strategy. The challenge that Nancy Pelosi has, and you see it every time she speaks, is to try to keep this within the four corners of the Constitution, recognize the wrongdoing by the chief executive of the United States and the responsibility of the Congress to hold the president accountable. She wants to stay within the four corners. What she is facing is a Republican Party that is suggesting this is about Democratic hatred of the President of the United States. This is about Democrats at all costs trying to undo the last election or doing what they can to impact the next one. And Nancy Pelosi is trying to remain faithful to the constitutional requirements of the Congress.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we heard yesterday, right? Yesterday, we heard Republicans say this is a process that started the day Donald Trump won election. This is a process that's been going on since the day after the election.
They are. But what Republicans are playing to is this. They don't believe that the nation has been fully persuaded in favor of impeachment. The 14-point bump that happened about 2 or 3 weeks ago, they believed as a result of just now a fully informed electorate that typically behaves in a 50-50 manner. So they need to hold their 50%. And the way they do that is by delegitimizing the process. Unfortunately, for the country and for the Republican Party, Republicans on Capitol Hill are assisting Trump in shredding the edges of the Constitution, and they are creating long-term damage to their own party. They are losing credibility by simply refusing to recognize the underlying truth of the president's impeachable behavior.
And Kelly, as that hearing that I mentioned yesterday was happening on Capitol Hill, back at the White House, the president's lawyers were meeting with Senate Republicans to talk impeachment. What can you tell us about that meeting, and what is the president's strategy here?
Well, Chris, this is about jumping ahead and expecting that there will be a different playing field in the Senate. A lot of frustration here at the White House over how the House Democrats have been able to control the process by virtue of being in the majority. And so now that there is an acceptance that the train is moving toward an actual vote of impeachment, that there isn't a way for the president and his allies to derail that process except to have a political argument, they're looking for what happens in the Senate. And part of what that conversation has been, allies of the president from the White House counsel's office, speaking with Republican senators about what would a trial look like. And the message from the president is that he does not want something to be quickly dispatched. He wants a full live action trial, meaning actual witnesses brought in, not taped depositions, a full argument litigating all of the things that they feel they have not been able to say fully during this process of the House and what has transpired so far. Now, there may be reasons going forward where they may temper that, but at this point, the signal they're trying to send is effectively a bring it on strategy. The president saying, do it quickly in the House, let's get to the next phase, where he believes by the sheer weight of numbers on the Republican side that it would be very unlikely to peel away Republican votes in a substantive number that could remove him from office, and they want to use a trial to make their political argument. Of course, all of that would then be presumably happening during an election year while Democrats are battling it out on the campaign trail to try to find their nominee, the president working the colleagues he has in the Senate to try to make his case. A lot of that is the positioning of the moment. We'll have to see where we are when it actually transpires in terms of real witnesses coming forward. Think of a Hunter Biden, think of an Adam Schiff calling the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. But an aggressive position at this point is the message coming from the White House after a lot of frustration and a choice not to partake in the limited way they could in the House, because even if they had participated there, Democrats would still be able to make the decisions about witnesses and so forth as the majority party. So saying no to the House, embracing the Senate, and trying to encourage this to move forward. An unexpected strategy, perhaps, Chris, but this is now the president embracing this in a way where the fight that he is often associated with would take a form on the Senate floor. Chris?
So, Garrett, let's go back to this moment and the questions that Nancy Pelosi got in that room about whether or not there's any backlash, political concerns. Now, of course, she tried to push back, as she has repeatedly over the course of this process, saying this isn't about politics, it's about the Constitution. But there are those reports, Garrett, that when the speaker behind closed doors asked Democrats if they're ready for impeachment, they answered in unison that they are. So is this a caucus united, or are there lingering concerns, especially among more moderate members, about the timeline, about how things are proceeding?
I think they're united and there are lingering concerns. I think both of those things can be true here. Democrats understand that they have started a process that they can't really turn back now. They're pushing ahead, and the stronger that they can cloak this in the Constitution, the better off they are. The more that you make this about who it helps next November, the harder it is to defend, the uglier the politics get. Now, those politics are going to be ugly. I mean, this is a political action. An impeachment is not a criminal trial. It's a political trial. So this is a political process. process. But by trying to use the language of the Constitution, the language of history, Pelosi was trying to build on what she hopes a lot of people saw on television yesterday, this hearing with all these constitutional scholars who can present this in constitutional and historical terms, not in the terms of, whether this is going to be a bad thing or a good thing in like Democrat +2 districts next year. I mean, the more that they get into that sort of thing, the more it's the kind of thing that people might turn off. Democrats need this to feel big and important and a defense of the Constitution, and not just like the next political play to score points off of President Trump. So, Congressman, let me get a big picture thought from you, especially given your experience, having been on the Hill for Clinton, having been a part of Congress. In yesterday's hearing, the Republican ranking member, Doug Collins, suggested that the Democratic witness, Pamela Karlan, might not have studied the intel reports, and boy, did she fire back. Let's take a listen.
Mr. Collins, I would like to say to you, sir, that I read transcripts of every one of the witnesses who appeared in the live hearing because I would not speak about these things without reviewing the facts. So I'm insulted by the suggestion that as a law professor, I don't care about those facts. But everything I read on those occasions tells me that when President Trump invited, indeed demanded foreign involvement in our upcoming election, he struck at the very heart of what makes this a republic to which we pledge allegiance. I think that was a wow moment for a lot of people. We have seen some members of the minority going after witnesses, suggesting that they're not testifying to things that they're not supposed to be there even to testify for. And I kind of draw a line when you see how bitter the politics is, and we've seen it throughout this, that sort of got lost in all this was Congressman Denny Heck, who I'm sure lamented how bad things have gotten, and he announced he won't run for re-election next year, and he put out a long statement, but the key part of it is that all of this has, as he put it, rendered my soul weary. We even heard Jonathan Turley talking about how exhausted everyone is. Are things just going to get worse before they get better?
Look, I kind of can feel that question in my gut, Chris, because it's a bit of my own personal journey as well in terms of leaving the Republican Party. In that moment, the reality, what was left unsaid, is that Professor Karlan had actually read all the material. Doug Collins had not. You have Republican legislators who don't care to see the truth in this matter because it doesn't serve their objective. And the heartbreaking part of this, for Heck, for myself, for others, for the country, is that you have one of the two major parties in the Republican Party today who is willing to delegitimize this process. They're making allegations about Democrats delegitimizing this process, but it is Donald Trump and the Republicans who refuse to allow Mick Mulvaney, Pompeo, Kupperman, and others to actually testify. Donald Trump will not actually release the full transcript. It's just a summary that was created in a light most favorable to the president. Republicans are willing to be complicit with Donald Trump in this, and at some point we have to recognize that they are accountable for destabilizing the institution of the Congress. And I think that's the heartbreak that Denny Heck was referring to. And in that moment, you saw from Doug Collins and every other Republican that they're not willing to at least accept the truth and argue for a lesser consequence for Donald Trump. Democrats in '98 were willing to accept the truth and argue for a censure. Republicans are unwilling to do that, and it's why I believe they will lose legitimacy over the next decade. In this moment, their legacy as a party is being cemented, and it is not in a light favorable to the GOP, nor should it be.
David Jolly, thank you for that. Kelly O'Donnell, Garrett Haake, Jake Sherman, who had to run and do some more reporting. Our thanks to him as well. I want to bring in Congressman Joe Neguse, a Democrat from Colorado who sits on the Judiciary Committee. It's good to see you. Maybe I'll start there if I can, Congressman, because Nancy Pelosi spoke about the importance of this, the historic nature of this, how it's not about politics, it's about the Constitution. I wonder, though, as it is the responsibility of those who want to impeach this president to make the case to the American people, does the exhaustion work against you? Do you think that the American people are just tired of the politics, even though you say this isn't about politics?
Well, I would say this. I couldn't agree more with the speaker. I thought her remarks this morning in her press conference and the statement previous to that were powerful and were compelling. And her ultimately hearkening back to the wisdom of the founders and the solemn obligation that we have here in the Congress to defend the Constitution and to defend our democracy, I think it just couldn't be more important. I will say I agree with the comments of your prior guest, Congressman Jolly, that I think a lot of us here in the Congress have a profound sense of disappointment that so many of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle refuse to ultimately choose country over party. I participated in the hearing yesterday. You showed a clip of it previously, one exchange, and I was taken aback at the fact that so many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle refused to approach their job in a serious and methodical and sober-minded fashion that would respect the gravity of this moment that we find ourselves in. So look, I think the House Democratic Caucus is unified in taking this obligation very seriously and moving forward in a methodical way. We intend to do that over the course of the coming weeks, and ultimately we'll let the chips fall where they may.
Because the speaker brought it up about Monday, and we just got this, which is a release from your committee that says at 9 o'clock on Monday morning, the House Judiciary Committee will hold a hearing to receive presentations. Tell us more about this hearing moving forward and the next steps for your committee, Congressman.
So as you said, the hearing was just noticed, so I haven't had a chance yet to talk in detail with my colleagues with respect to the mechanics of Monday's hearing, but I suspect that the Judiciary Committee and ultimately the Congress and the American people will have an opportunity to hear directly from the counsels for both the House Intelligence Committee and the House Judiciary Committee about the comprehensive investigations that have taken place, the evidence that has been submitted to our committee in the form of the comprehensive report prepared by Adam Schiff and the masterful work that he did in the Intelligence Committee. And then ultimately we'll be able to apply the legal standards that were expounded upon yesterday by the constitutional scholars that had assembled in the panel before Judiciary Committee against the evidence that we've compiled, and then proceed, as the Speaker made clear in her remarks this morning, to work in conjunction with the chairman of the 6 relevant committees of jurisdiction to prepare articles for potential consideration by the House. So again, the work will be methodical, it will be serious, it will meet the gravity of the moment that we find ourselves in terms of the constitutional obligations that we have as an Article 1 co-equal branch of government to hold this administration accountable.
I just rewatched your questioning from yesterday, and you made the case for the president being guilty of witness intimidation, particularly in the case of Ambassador Yovanovitch, who frankly said that his tweets were intimidating, including one that he tweeted while she was testifying. Chairman Nadler's team has indicated they're considering going beyond Ukraine and drafting articles. Do you think obstruction should be one of the articles of impeachment? What's your thought process now in terms of the articles?
So I'm not going to speculate about particular articles that I think the committee may refer to the full House. I do think there will be a robust discussion about obstruction of justice, about abuse of power, about this president's betrayal of the national interest and his corruption, ultimately, of our elections, and ultimately the threat that conduct poses to our national security. But in terms of specific articles, I think we're going to take this one step at a time. I will certainly tell you that I was deeply concerned by the president's conduct during the Intelligence Committee hearings, as you mentioned, when he tweeted out these attacks against brave public servants and patriots like Ambassador Yovanovitch and Ambassador Taylor, who, as you know, was ultimately appointed by this administration to serve as the ambassador to Ukraine. And I do think that conduct is relevant to our consideration moving forward as we consider what potential articles of impeachment may be drafted by our committee.
Congressman Joe Neguse, we appreciate you taking the time. I know you guys have a lot on your plate right now. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
That's going to end this particular message coming from our Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. This is December the 5th, year 2019. We have reached a summit moment in history to the point that now it has become official in the eyes of the judicial laws of the land that this impeachment now is heading to an actual trial. In other words, they're writing up what they need to write up right now in the regards towards submitting it to Donald Trump of the reason why that they feel that it is appropriate for him to step down, step out of office. I'm sorry a while ago for getting a bit emotional. This whole thing has been nothing but a roller coaster ride for the past 3 weeks because I've been keeping up with it very, very intensely, micromanaging it in a way, this is this is the core of not only what's happening today, but this is the core of our children and our children's children, of what's going to be happening in their lives 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years from now. And if we don't get it right today, in the present moment that we're in, it will sure enough become even more so of a calamity in 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years from now. So, 2 thumbs up to the House and what that they have made a conscious decision towards doing with Nancy Pelosi today in the regard of going ahead and moving forward in this. No longer is considered an inquiry. This is no longer considered just a hearing, but this is actually fixing to go off into an actual trial to where Donald J. Trump's future now holds in the balances of whether or not he will remain the president of the present, much less a possibility of the president of the future. And it's really sad because he tipped off on so many good things pertaining to unveiling the corruption that was currently going on in the White House in so many different areas. So many different areas. He was touching off on so many good areas. But on so many other areas, he was ignoring. You know, just like the deal with climate control or guns. You know, he has yet to endorse those areas in a realistical way. In a realistical way. You know, anybody can panter around and act like that they're really concerned, but to actually get involved, to pull up your sleeves and say enough is enough, those are 2 areas that for some reason he didn't even address. He acts as if that it ain't even real. And once more, Nancy Pelosi brought that out. She said that would be an election issue more so than an impeachment issue. Right now, we're talking about an impeachment issue because of what has been done in the past that leads to our present. But it's more than just our present. It's pertaining to our future. And it's not necessarily our future, but our children's future and their children's children's future. So this is just about as serious as it gets pertaining to our open, fair, free democracy that we hold dear, or we're supposed to hold dear as an Americans, if we're going to pass the torch on down to the next generation, and that generation passes it on down to the next generation by holding the limelight in the dream, in the desire, in the vision that our founders, that our builders, that our ancestors had 240 years ago plus. intense moments, high stakes drama. Who would ever thought that all this was going to lead to this whenever the election of 2016 went the way that it went, pertaining to Donald J. Trump. Good luck to all of us. And may God have mercy on all of us. And may God bless America.